My 70-year-old hands were still shaking when a woman who had no right to stand in my kitchen slid the house keys across the table. "You signed everything," she said, with a smile. "This ranch isn't yours anymore." My son opened the front door and pointed into the rain. "Leave now, Dad. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I walked away with nothing but an old canvas bag and a lifetime of memories. The next morning, while they celebrated inside my family home, more than 50 black cars rolled through the front gate. Then one man in a black suit stepped out, and suddenly no one could speak. Before we begin, I'm grateful you're here with me today. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your country, your city. I'd love to know who's in this community with me. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational value. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything it teaches, I mean sincerely. The summer of 1994 nearly broke me. Not because of the drought, though. Lord knows that year's drought was bad enough to make a grown man sit on his porch and pray for clouds that never came. Not because of the cattle prices, either, though they'd dropped low enough to make every trip to the auction house feel like handing money directly to someone who hated you. No, the summer of 1994 nearly broke me because of one August night, when everything I thought I understood about my own life got quietly rearranged by a 14-year-old boy hiding in the back of my truck. My name is Thomas Miller. I've worked this land in Midland County, West Texas, my entire life, 48 years. At that point, most of them spent doing exactly what my father did before me and his father before him. You get up before the sun. You work until your back reminds you that you're not as young as you think. You sit on the porch after supper and watch the sky go dark over the mesquite and the red dirt, and you try to feel grateful for what you have instead of afraid of what you might lose. My father had a saying he repeated so often I could hear it in my sleep. "The land tells you things," he'd say, squinting out at the fields like they were talking directly to him, "if you're quiet enough to listen." That August night, I was listening. It was past 9 o'clock when I pulled the truck around to the equipment shed after a long haul delivering cattle to a buyer outside Odessa. The air still held the day's heat, that particular kind of West Texas heat that doesn't apologize for itself, that presses against your skin like a hand that refuses to let go. I killed the engine, rolled my neck until it cracked, and climbed out into the dark. I always checked the truck bed before calling it a night. Old habit from my father. He'd once found a coyote had gotten into a load of feed he left unsecured, and after that he checked everything twice. So I grabbed my flashlight from the cab, walked around to the back, lowered the tailgate, and swept the beam across the bed. The light caught a pair of eyes. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs, I actually took a step backward. Then training took over. 48 years of ranch life means you don't panic easily, and I held the light steady and looked again. It was a boy. He was pressed into the far corner of the truck bed, like he was trying to push himself through the metal itself. Couldn't have been more than 14 years old, though the way he looked that night made him seem both younger and 1,000 years older at the same time. He was thin, not just lean the way ranch boys get from honest work, but thin the way people get when they haven't eaten enough for a very long time. His dark hair was matted and damp. His clothing was torn in several places, and even in the yellow flashlight beam I could see dark bruising along his left forearm and a cut above his right eyebrow that had dried into a dark line across his forehead. He flinched when the light hit him. His arms came up fast, not attacking, protecting. The gesture of someone who had learned that sudden movements from other people usually meant pain was coming. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice the same low, even tone I used with spooked horses. "I'm not going to hurt you." He didn't lower his arms right away. His chest was heaving. His eyes dark brown, sharp, burning with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite defiance, but was something in between, fixed on me and didn't blink. I'm going to set the flashlight down right here, I said, placing it on the tailgate so the beam pointed up and away from his face. So you can see me better. My name's Thomas Miller. This is my property, and I'm asking you calm and friendly, who are you, son? A long moment passed. I could hear the crickets going full chorus out in the dark fields. Somewhere in the distance, one of my dogs barked once and then went quiet. The boy lowered his arms slowly. His jaw was tight. His hands, I noticed, were gripping something, a small object pressed against his chest, like it was the only thing he owned in the world, which I would later learn was almost exactly the truth. Leo, he finally said. His voice was dry and cracked like a creek bed in August. Leo Reyes. Leo. I nodded like we were being introduced at church. How long have you been back there? Since Pecos. His eyes cut sideways, then back to me. I didn't know where the truck was going. I just needed to get away from the border. The border. I felt something shift in my chest, not quite alarm, not quite pity, something heavier than both. You crossed recently. I grew up in Texas, he said quickly, and there was a flare of something fierce in his expression, pride maybe, or the particular anger of someone who's been misunderstood too many times. I was born in El Paso. I have papers. He pulled a folded document from inside his shirt, with shaking fingers, and held it out. I didn't take it. I believe you, I said. The fierceness softened slightly. He looked almost confused by that, like being believed wasn't something he'd encountered much lately. What are you running from? I asked. He looked down at the object in his other hand. In the faint light, I could see it now, a compass. Small, brass-cased, the kind you'd find in a military surplus store, or passed down from a father who wanted his son to always be able to find his way home. The glass face was scratched. One hinge on the cover was bent. But the needle, I noticed, was perfectly steady, pointing true north without hesitation. Some men, Leo said quietly. They move things across the border. He stopped, swallowed. His throat worked hard. I was helping them. I didn't know what I was helping with at first. When I found out, I ran. He looked up at me, and the exhaustion in his eyes hit me somewhere deep. They've been looking for me for 9 days. My father's voice came to me then clear, as if he were standing right beside me. The land tells you things if you're quiet enough to listen. What the land was telling me right then was simple. This boy hadn't eaten in days. He was hurt. He was frightened. And he was alone in a truck bed on a ranch in the middle of West Texas, with nothing but a brass compass and whatever was left of his courage. When did you last eat? I asked. Leo's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I picked up the flashlight. Come on, I said. Evelyn, my wife, she made a pot of chili this evening. There's plenty left. He stared at me. You're not going to call the police. I'm going to get you fed first, I said. Everything else can wait. Something moved across his face then, not relief exactly, because I don't think he trusted relief yet, but the very first edge of it, cautious and fragile as a match flame in wind. He gripped that compass tighter. He climbed out of the truck bed, slowly wincing, when he put weight on his left leg. He was taller than I'd expected once he was standing nearly 6 feet, though he couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds. He stood there in my driveway in the dark, this skinny, battered 14-year-old boy who had run 9 days from people who wanted to hurt him, and he looked at me with those dark eyes that held more weight than any kid his age should have to carry. Why are you helping me? He asked. I thought about my father's words. I thought about the compass in his hand pointing north no matter what. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be when nobody was watching. Because it's the right thing to do, Aisha, I said. Now come inside before that chili gets any colder. I turned and walked toward the house. Behind me, after a moment's hesitation, I heard his footsteps follow. The porch light was on. Through the kitchen window, I could see Evelyn moving around inside, and then she went still because she'd seen us coming. The light caught her face clearly. She was standing at the kitchen door when we reached the porch steps. Her eyes went from me to the boy and back to me, and I watched her expression do something complicated in about 3 seconds flat. "Thomas," she said, in the particular tone of voice that meant she had about 14 questions and wasn't sure which one to ask first. "Evelyn," I said, "this is Leo. He's hungry." Evelyn didn't say a word for the first 3 seconds. She stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel folded over one arm, her green eyes moving from my face to the boy standing behind me, then back to my face again. I knew that look. In 30 years of marriage, I'd learned to read Evelyn Miller the way I read weather, and right now the pressure was dropping fast. "Thomas Eugene Miller," she said quietly. "You want to explain what's going on?" "This is Leo," I said. "He needs food and a place to sleep tonight." Evelyn looked at Leo directly. He was standing just inside the door, shoulders pulled in, gripping that compass so hard his knuckles had gone pale. The cut above his eyebrow had started bleeding again from the walk to the house, and a thin red line was working its way down toward his jaw. Whatever Evelyn had been about to say, she didn't say it. Instead, she pointed at the kitchen table. "Sit down," she told Leo, her voice shifting into the firm, gentle tone she used when something needed doing and questions could wait. "I'll get the first aid kit." Leo looked at me. I nodded. He sat. While Evelyn cleaned the cut above his eye, Leo wincing, but holding perfectly still, jaw clenched tight, I reheated the chili and cut a thick slice of the cornbread she'd made that afternoon. I set the bowl in front of him, and he stared at it for just a moment, like he was making sure it was real before he picked up the spoon. He ate 3 bowls. Later, after Leo was asleep on the cot in the storage room with a clean bandage on his forehead, Evelyn pulled me into the hallway and closed the door behind her. Her arms were crossed. Her eyes were sharp. "Thomas, that boy, came across the border country," she whispered. "Do you understand what kind of trouble we could be in?" "He was born in El Paso," I said. "He showed me his documents." "That's not the point." Her voice cracked slightly. "Those men he's running from, if they followed him here." "Then we deal with it," I said. "Deal with it." She pressed her fingers against her mouth, and I could see her hands trembling. "Thomas, we have a son. We have this farm. I am asking you to think about what you're risking." "I am thinking about it," I said. "And I'm thinking about what kind of people we want to be." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes bright with tears she was too angry to let fall. Then she turned and walked to the bedroom and shut the door behind her. Not a slam. Something worse, a quiet, deliberate click that said she was done talking. I sat on the porch alone until 2 in the morning. The next morning I drove into Midland, while Evelyn and Leo were both still asleep. I stopped at the First National Bank on Wall Street and asked to access my private savings account, the one I'd opened 12 years ago and never told Evelyn about. Not out of dishonesty. I just wanted something that was mine alone, something I was building toward. The balance was $11,400. I'd been saving it to buy the Henderson parcel, 40 acres of good grazing land on the east side of the county that old Roy Henderson had been hinting at selling for 3 years. 40 acres like that would have changed the shape of this ranch for the next generation. I took out a pen and wrote on the deposit slip for the east pasture. Then I crossed it out. I folded the slip in half, tucked it in my shirt pocket, and told the teller I needed to speak with someone about immigration legal services. She gave me the name of an attorney on Texas Street who handled documentation cases. On the drive home, I pulled over on a dirt road, took the deposit slip out of my pocket, and held my lighter to the corner. I watched it burn down to nothing in the dry August air. The east pasture was never going to happen. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt completely at peace with that. When I got home, Julian was leaning against the fence post near the gate. My son was 18 that summer, broad-shouldered like me, with Evelyn's sharp eyes and a restlessness I'd never quite been able to reach. He watched my truck pull in with an expression I couldn't fully read. "Who's the kid?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the house. "His name's Leo," I said, climbing out. "He's going to be staying with us for a while." Julian's jaw tightened. "How long is a while?" "However long he needs," I said. Something shifted behind my son's eyes, quick like a cloud crossing the sun. He pushed off the fence post and walked toward the barn without another word, his footsteps sharp and deliberate across the dry ground. I watched him go, and I felt it a small, cold knot forming somewhere in my chest that I told myself was nothing. I was wrong about that. Leo Reyes worked harder than any man I'd ever hired. I don't say that lightly. I'd had ranch hands come through Miller Ranch for 30 years, big men, experienced men who'd been working cattle since before Leo was born. But none of them showed up before sunrise without being asked, and none of them stayed past dark without being told to. Leo did both every single day from his very first week. He never complained, never asked for easier work. When I handed him a post-hole digger in 100-degree heat, he dug without a word. When a water line broke at the north end of the property, and we spent 6 hours in the mud fixing it, Leo was right beside me the whole time, sleeves rolled up, hands bleeding from the rough pipe fittings, refusing every offer to take a break. "You don't have to prove anything," I told him one afternoon, watching him haul a feed bag that would have made a grown man think twice. Leo set the bag down and looked at me with those steady, dark eyes. "Yes, sir," he said. "I do." I didn't argue. Some things a man needs to work out for himself. What I noticed, what started changing everything, was what Leo did in the evenings. After supper, after chores, when most young men his age would have found a television or a porch and called it a night, Leo disappeared into the equipment shed. I found him there one evening, with one of my old accounting ledgers spread open on the workbench, a pencil behind his ear. Running figures I hadn't looked at in 2 years. "Where'd you learn to read a ledger?" I asked. He looked up, not embarrassed, just matter of fact. "My father kept books for a feed supply company in El Paso. He taught me when I was 8. A pause. He said numbers don't lie, even when people do. I pulled up a stool and sat down. "What do you see?" Leo turned the ledger toward me and pointed. "You're overpaying on your equipment insurance by about 12%. And this fuel account." He traced a column with his finger. "There's a billing error that's been repeating for at least 14 months. I stared at the numbers. He was right on both counts. That was the night I started making phone calls about the University of Texas. The immigration paperwork took nearly 2 years and cost more than I'd budgeted, even with the attorney on Texas Street working at a reduced rate. There were forms and interviews and waiting periods that stretched for months with no explanation. There were moments when I wasn't sure it was going to work. But I kept paying, and the attorney kept filing, and in the spring of 1996, Leo Reyes became a fully documented resident of the United States of America, with a scholarship application to UT Austin sitting on my kitchen table. One evening, I came into the equipment shed and found Leo standing very still, holding the acceptance letter in both hands. He didn't hear me come in. I watched him read it twice, then fold it carefully along the original creases, like it was something that might break if handled wrong. "Leo," I said. He turned around. His eyes were red. He'd been crying, and he wasn't trying to hide it. Leo was never the kind of person who pretended to feel less than he did. His chin was trembling, and his voice came out rough and uneven when he spoke. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I need to pay you back. Every dollar. I'll work it off. I'll send money every month once I'm working. I swear to God I will." "Stop," I said. "You don't understand what you gave up. Leo." I stepped forward and put my hand on his shoulder, and I felt him go still under the weight of it. "The East pasture was just land. You're a person. There's no comparison." He pressed his lips together hard. A tear cut a straight line down his left cheek, and he wiped it away fast, almost angry at himself for it. His hand was shaking. "I don't know how to say thank you big enough," he said. "Then don't say it," I told him. "Show it someday." What I didn't see, what I was too focused on Leo to notice clearly enough, was Julian standing in the doorway behind me. My son was 18 that year, built like a younger version of me, with Evelyn's sharp eyes and a jaw that went hard when he was working something out internally. He'd been civil enough to Leo on the surface, never outright hostile, never cruel. But there was a distance in him that I'd been telling myself was just the natural separation between an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old living in the same house. I turned and found him there leaning against the doorframe, with his arms crossed and an expression on his face I didn't have the right word for. Not anger exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been sitting in him for a while. "Julian," I said, "how long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," he said. His voice was flat and controlled, which with Julian was always more dangerous than shouting. He looked at Leo just one long, measuring look, then back at me. "I had to earn my place here every day of my life, Dad. Every single day. I want you to know that I noticed." He pushed off the doorframe and walked out into the dark before I could answer. Leo watched him go. Then he looked at me, and I could see the guilt moving across his face like a shadow. "I'm sorry," Leo said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble between you and your son." "That's not your fault," I said. But the cold knot that had first formed in my chest the night Leo arrived pulled tighter, and this time I didn't tell myself it was nothing, because I was beginning to understand that it wasn't. The morning Leo left for Austin, the sky was the color of a bruise. Not dark enough to promise rain, West Texas skies almost never kept that promise in September, but heavy enough to make the horizon look like it was pressing down on the mesquite and red dirt like the land itself was holding its breath. I was up at 4:30, same as always. I made coffee, stood on the back porch, and listened to the quiet that comes before the rest of the world wakes up. Evelyn came out at 5, wrapped in the old quilt she kept on the bedroom chair. She stood beside me and didn't say anything for a while, just held her mug with both hands and watched the dark. "He's already awake," she finally said. "I could hear him moving around in there an hour ago." "He's nervous," I said. "He was 16 years old, and he's never lived anywhere but here, and El Paso," she said. Her voice had gone soft in a way that told me she'd already cried about this once this morning privately, the way Evelyn always handled the things that hit her hardest. "Of course he's nervous." We drove to the Midland bus station in my truck, me and Leo, just the two of us. Evelyn had hugged Leo so hard in the driveway that he'd made a small, surprised sound, and then his arms had come up and hugged her back just as fiercely, his face pressed against her shoulder, his eyes squeezed shut. Julian had watched from the barn doorway, hands in his pockets, and raised one hand in something that might have been a wave if you were being generous about it. Leo didn't say much on the drive. He sat with his duffel bag on his lap, new dark green bought at the hardware store in town because it was the most practical option, and Leo had insisted on nothing fancy, and he watched the flat land roll past the window with an expression I recognized. It was the look of someone memorizing something, filing it away carefully so it would still be there when he needed it. You scared? I asked him about 10 miles out from town. He thought about it honestly, which was always Leo's way. Yes, sir, he said. But it's the right kind of scared. Like the first time you put me on that fence post with the post hole digger, and I didn't know if my arms were strong enough. He paused. They were. They were, I agreed. The bus station was nearly empty at that hour. A woman with 2 young children sat against the far wall. An old man in a trucker's cap was asleep across 3 plastic chairs. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that particular sound that makes every bus station in America feel exactly the same no matter where you are. Leo checked in at the counter, got his ticket, and we stood together near the gate. The bus was already there, idling in the gray morning air outside the glass doors, breathing diesel exhaust into the cool. I'd been thinking about what to say for 3 days. I'd written things down and crossed them out. I'd rehearsed sentences in the truck on the way to the feed store, and then forgotten them entirely on the way home. Standing there at that gate, I looked at this boy. This young man, now taller than when he'd arrived, shoulders filled out from 2 years of honest labor, carrying himself with a quiet steadiness that made my chest ache with something I didn't have a clean word for, and everything I'd rehearsed went right out of my head. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the compass. Leo went very still. "That was your father's," he said. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I know," I said. "But your father gave it to you so you could find your way, not so you could hold on to it forever." I held it out. "You left it on the workbench the night we got your acceptance letter. I've been keeping it safe." Leo took it with both hands. He looked down at it for a long moment, the scratched glass, the bent hinge, the needle pointing steadily north without apology. His jaw worked hard. His eyes went bright and glassy, and he blinked fast, fighting it. "Mr. Miller," he started. "Thomas," I said. I'd told him 100 times. He looked up at me, and his composure finally cracked right down the middle. His chin trembled. He pressed his lips together so hard they went white, and 2 tears broke loose and ran straight down his face, and he didn't wipe them away this time. "I don't know how to leave," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. My own throat had gone thick in a way I hadn't expected. I cleared it once hard. "Yes, you do," I said. "You put one foot in front of the other, and you go build something worth coming back to." I put my hand on his shoulder the same way I had the night he'd held that acceptance letter, and I felt him steady under it. In Texas, a real man doesn't turn his back on the land or the people who saved him. You remember that? Leo nodded. He couldn't speak anymore. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment, composing himself the way young men do when they've been taught that falling apart in public costs something. Then he straightened, took a breath, gripped that compass in his right hand. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'll remember." The bus driver called the final boarding. Leo picked up his duffel bag. He shook my hand firm, both of us holding on a beat longer than a normal handshake, and then he walked through those glass doors and out into the gray September morning, without looking back. I stood at the window and watched him climb the steps, watched the doors close behind him, watched the bus pull slowly out of the bay and turn onto the street and pick up speed until it was just a shape moving away through the early light. Then it was gone. I drove home alone. The truck felt very large and very quiet. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the ranch, the equipment shed, the fence line, the fields stretching out under that bruised sky. I told myself he'd call. He'd write. We'd stay in touch the way people do. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that the world has a way of pulling people forward so fast that looking back becomes harder with every mile. The letters came at first, then postcards, Then a phone call at Christmas. Then every other Christmas. Then silence that stretched longer than either of us intended. The way silences always do when two people are both too busy living to tend the distance between them. I kept checking the mailbox anyway. 17 years is a long time to watch a man become someone you don't fully recognize. I'm talking about Julian. I'm talking about myself too, if I'm being honest. Because the Thomas Miller who stood at that bus station in 1996 and watched Leo's bus disappear into the gray morning was not exactly the same man who sat on this porch in 2013 watching the last of another bad harvest come in under a sky that hadn't produced meaningful rain in 4 months. Life does that to a person, wears down the edges, replaces certainty with something quieter and more cautious. But Julian's changes cut deeper than mine. He'd been a restless kid, my son, smart enough to know he wasn't being challenged, stubborn enough to resist anything that might actually challenge him. After Leo left, I'd hoped foolishly maybe that the tension in the house would ease. It did on the surface. Julian threw himself into ranch work with an energy I hadn't seen from him before, and for about 2 years I let myself believe we'd turned a corner. Then the gambling started. It wasn't dramatic at first. A few poker nights in Odessa with men from the oil fields. Some weekend trips to the casinos over in Louisiana that he mentioned casually, like they were nothing. Evelyn noticed before I did. She always noticed things before I did. And she brought it up one evening at supper in her careful way, the way she raised hard topics by setting them gently on the table rather than throwing them. "Julian called today," she said, refilling my coffee without being asked. "He needs to borrow the truck next weekend. Going to Shreveport with some friends." "Again," I said. She just looked at me over the coffee pot. That was all she needed to say. The first loan I found out about directly was in 2004. Julian came to me straight. I'll give him that. Sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and told me he'd borrowed $40,000 against his truck, his equipment trailer, and 2 other pieces of machinery that were registered in his name. He'd taken a loss on an investment that he described as a real estate opportunity, which I later understood meant he'd handed money to someone who'd told him what he wanted to hear. My jaw went tight. I felt the anger rise up hot and fast the way it always did with Julian, and I pushed it back down the same way I always did, because losing my temper with my son had never once produced anything useful. "Julian," I said carefully, "those assets are your property. You had the right to do this. But I need to know, is there anything attached to the ranch? Anything in the ranch's name?" He met my eyes. "No, sir," he said. "Nothing touching the ranch." I believed him. That was my mistake, not the only one I made with Julian, but one I'd remember later with particular clarity. Evelyn passed in the spring of 2009. Breast cancer caught late, gone fast, 4 months from diagnosis to the morning. I sat beside her bed and held her hand while she stopped breathing. She was 63 years old. She still had Evelyn's sharp green eyes right up until the end, and the last thing she said to me clearly and without drama was, "Check on Julian Thomas. He needs more from you than you think." I tried. God knows I tried. But grief does strange things to a household. Julian came back to the ranch full-time after Evelyn passed, and for a while the work held us together, the way shared hard labor sometimes can. We didn't talk much about feelings that wasn't our way, either of us, but we were in the same fields every day, and there was something in that. Then the drought years started in earnest. 2011, 2012, 2013, 3 years of watching the sky go white with heat and stay empty. Cattle prices dropped. Feed costs climbed. The old combine harvester needed $15,000 in repairs that I didn't have and couldn't borrow against without putting the ranch at risk. So I nursed it through 2 harvests, held together with parts from a junkyard in Pecos, and my own stubbornness. Sarah Miller, Julian's wife, married 2007, divorced 2011, had told me once in a moment of unusual candor over coffee in my kitchen that Julian's problem wasn't money. "It's that he never figured out what he actually wanted," she said, stirring her cup without drinking from it. "So he just keeps reaching for the next thing and hoping that one will be it." I thought about that a lot in the drought years. What I didn't know, what Julian hadn't told me, and I hadn't found any reason to look for, was that the borrowing hadn't stopped in 2004. It had just gotten quieter, more spread out. Different lenders, different assets, always just outside the boundary of what I could see. By 2013, my son owed money to 4 separate creditors, all of it secured against machinery and vehicles that were technically his, none of it touching the ranch deed. Not yet. Late that fall, I was sorting through a box of old files in the equipment shed when I found the address. It was written on a piece of notepad paper. Leo's handwriting, from the night before he left for Austin. Leo Reyes, 4412 Guadalupe Street, Austin, Texas, 78751. A dorm address, long since irrelevant. The paper had gone soft and yellow at the edges, the ink faded to the color of old denim. I stood there in the equipment shed, with that piece of paper in my hand, and I felt something move through my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite grief, not quite longing. Something in between, like a door opening onto a room you'd forgotten existed. I put the paper back in the box. 3 days later, my phone rang. A voice I didn't recognize introduced himself as a representative from a geological survey company out of Midland. He said they'd been conducting subsurface analysis in the county and had some findings they'd like to discuss with me personally. "What kind of findings?" I asked. "The kind," he said, "that I'd rather explain in person, Mr. Miller." I told him to come Tuesday morning. That night, I sat on the porch until well past midnight, listening to the land the way my father taught me. But whatever it was, trying to tell me, I couldn't quite make it out. Carter Webb arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, driving a black Suburban that looked like it had never once touched a dirt road. I watched him pull up from the kitchen window, watched him step out in pressed khakis and a sport coat that cost more than my monthly fuel bill. Watched him survey the ranch with the particular kind of eyes that don't see land the way a farmer sees it. He wasn't looking at the fields. He was looking through them, down into the ground beneath them, calculating something I hadn't been asked about yet. I opened the door before he knocked. "Mr. Miller." He extended his hand with a practiced smile, the kind that arrives fully formed, no warmth building up to it. "Carter Webb, Vantage Energy. Thank you for making the time." His handshake was firm and a half-second too long. I'd shaken enough hands in my life to know when someone was performing confidence rather than feeling it. "Come in," I said. "Coffee's on." He sat at the kitchen table. Evelyn's kitchen table, the one she'd picked out at a furniture store in Midland 30 years ago, and refinished herself twice, and he spread his materials out with the efficiency of a man who did this regularly. Maps, charts, a bound report with the Vantage Energy logo on the cover. He moved Evelyn's old ceramic rooster salt shaker to the side to make room, and something about that small gesture made my jaw tighten in a way I didn't bother to hide. "Mr. Miller." Webb began turning the bound report to face me. "I'll get straight to the point. Vantage Energy commissioned a full subsurface geological survey of this section of Midland County approximately 8 months ago. The results were—" He paused, choosing his word carefully, significant. He opened the report to a page of technical diagrams that I couldn't fully read but didn't need to. The numbers in the margins told enough of the story. "There's an oil-bearing formation running approximately 200 feet beneath your property," Webb said. Based on our modeling, we're estimating recoverable reserves in the range of 3 to 4 million barrels. He let that sit for a moment, watching my face. At current market prices, Mr. Miller, the subsurface value of this land is somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million. The kitchen went very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. Outside, one of my dogs was barking at something down by the equipment shed. $25 million. I sat with that number and tried to feel something simple about it. Surprise, excitement, relief. But what I actually felt was a deep, complicated unease, like finding out the house you've lived in your whole life has a room you never knew existed. I appreciate you telling me, I said. What does Vantage want? Webb smiled again, that same assembled smile. We'd like to purchase the mineral rights or the property outright if you're open to it. We're prepared to offer $4.2 million for a full acquisition. He slid a one-page summary across the table. That's a clean cash offer, Mr. Miller. No contingencies. I looked at the number on the page. $4.2 million for land worth $25 million. I'd been a rancher my whole life, not a businessman, but I could do that arithmetic without a calculator. That's a significant difference from the number you just quoted me, I said. Webb nodded, not embarrassed at all. Surface acquisition and mineral development involve substantial capital risk on our end, Mr. Miller. Infrastructure drilling, environmental compliance, we're talking about years of investment before any return. The offer reflects that reality. I'm sure it does, I said. I folded the summary once and set it on the table beside my coffee cup. Mr. Webb, this land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather broke this ground. My father worked it until his hands wouldn't close properly in the mornings. I grew up on this dirt, and I intend to die on it. I looked at him directly. It's not for sale. Something moved behind Webb's eyes, not anger, not disappointment exactly, more like recalibration. He nodded slowly, reached into his jacket pocket, and produced a business card that he placed precisely at the edge of the table closest to me. I understand completely, he said in a tone that suggested he didn't understand at all and had no intention of stopping. Think it over. Offers like this have a way of looking different after a few weeks. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and extended his hand again. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Miller. I walked him to the door, watched him cross the yard to his Suburban, moving with the unhurried certainty of a man who was already planning his next approach before the first one was finished. The truck backed out of the driveway and turned south toward town. I stood on the porch for a moment, holding Webb's business card, feeling the February cold work through my jacket. Then I went back inside, dropped the card in the kitchen drawer, where I kept things I didn't want to think about yet, and poured myself a second cup of coffee. I was still at the table 20 minutes later when I heard boots on the porch steps. Julian came through the door without knocking, his habit since childhood, one I'd never been able to break him of, and stopped when he saw my face. His eyes went to the Vantage Energy report, still spread across the table, to the one-page summary I hadn't moved. He picked it up. I watched him read it. Watched his eyes move down the page, stop at the number, move back up to the top, then down to the number again. His breathing changed, got shallower quicker, and a color came into his face that I recognized with a cold, dropping sensation in my stomach. It was hunger. Not the honest kind that comes from a long day's work. The other kind. 25 million, Julian said softly. He set the paper down and looked at me. Dad, do you understand what this means? I told him no, I said. Julian stared at me. You told him... He stopped, pressed his hand flat on the table. Dad, we are barely keeping this ranch alive. We've had 3 drought years in a row. The combine needs another overhaul. We owe... He stopped himself again, and I noticed it, the sudden careful edit, the sentence that didn't finish. We owe what Julian, I said. He straightened up, rolled his shoulders back. Nothing that's your concern, he said, which was the most alarming thing he could possibly have said. Everything about this ranch is my concern, I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. Every dollar, every debt, every obligation, this is my land and my name on every piece of paper. So I'll ask you again. We owe what? Julian held my gaze for a long moment. His jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working in his cheek. Then he said, I'll handle it, Dad. I've always handled my own business. He walked out. The door didn't slam. Julian had learned somewhere along the way that not slamming a door could land harder than slamming it. I sat alone at Evelyn's kitchen table with the Vantage Energy report and the cold February light coming through the windows, and I thought about what she'd said to me in her last clear moments. Check on Julian Thomas. He needs more from you than you think. I'd been trying, Evelyn. God knows I'd been trying. That night I stood at the kitchen window after dark and saw headlights at the end of the driveway. A vehicle I didn't recognize was parked on the county road just past the gate. Julian's truck was beside it. Two men standing in the dark, talking. One of them was my son. The other one I was almost certain was Carter Webb. My hand tightened on the curtain. The cold knot in my chest, the one that had first formed the night Leo arrived, the one I'd been telling myself was nothing for 20 years, pulled itself into something harder and heavier than I'd ever felt it before. I let the curtain fall. Before I tell you what happened next, something that changed everything. Drop a 7 in the comments, so I know you're still with me. I read every single one, and it means the world. Quick note, parts of this story include fictional elements built for meaning and depth. If that's not something you want to hear, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the ceiling. Not my ceiling. Not the water-stained plaster of the bedroom I'd slept in for 40 years, with the crack running northwest from the light fixture that I'd been meaning to patch since 2003. This ceiling was white and flat and completely featureless, and it hummed faintly with the particular frequency of fluorescent lighting, and it took me a full 30 seconds to understand that I was in a hospital bed. My mouth tasted like old metal. My left arm had a needle taped to the inside of the elbow. The back of my head ached with a dull, steady pressure that felt like someone had placed a warm stone against my skull and left it there overnight. I tried to sit up. The room tilted. I grabbed the bed rail and held on until the tilting stopped. Easy. A woman's voice, calm and professional, from somewhere to my right. Give it a moment, Mr. Miller. You've been horizontal for about 14 hours. I turned my head carefully. A woman in her late 50s stood beside the bed reviewing a chart, trim, dark-haired, gone silver at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had the particular stillness of someone who spent their days in rooms where panic was unhelpful and had long since made their peace with that. Dr. Owens, she said, extending her hand when she saw me focusing. Patricia Owens, I've been your attending since they brought you in yesterday afternoon. She pulled a chair close and sat down, which told me this wasn't going to be a brief update. Do you remember what happened? I thought about it. I'd been in the equipment shed. I remembered that much, checking the belt tension on the irrigation pump the way I did every March before the season started. Then the shed had tilted the same way this room just had, but worse and faster, and then there was nothing until this ceiling. I fell, I said. You lost consciousness, Dr. Owens said. One of your neighbors found you on the shed floor and called 911. You're lucky she was passing by. May Hutchins. Had to be. May drove past my property every Tuesday morning on her way to the farmer's co-op in town. I made a mental note to bring her something from the garden when I got home. Your vitals are stable. Dr. Owens continued setting the chart on her knee and folding her hands over it. Blood pressure is high, but not dangerously so. The fall itself didn't cause any serious injury, some bruising on your left shoulder, nothing structural. She paused. But your blood work came back with something I want to discuss with you directly. She had a way of delivering information that was careful without being soft. I appreciated that. The panel showed elevated levels of a sedative compound called lorazepam, she said. It's a benzodiazepine used for anxiety sleep disorders, sometimes prescribed short-term for muscle tension. The concentration in your blood was significantly higher than would be consistent with normal therapeutic use. She looked at me steadily over her glasses. You're not currently prescribed lorazepam, Mr. Miller. I checked your medication file. The room was very quiet. I could hear a cart rolling down the hallway outside. I take blood pressure medication, I said. Lisinopril, 20 milligrams, same prescription for 6 years. I know, she said. That's what makes this result unusual. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Miller, I need to ask you directly. Has anyone else had access to your medications? Anyone who handles your pills, refills your organizer, brings them to you. The question landed in my chest like a stone dropping into still water. I felt the ripples move outward in every direction, touching things I didn't want them to touch. The answer was yes. Sarah had been coming by the ranch 3 times a week since Julian had asked her to a reconciliation of sorts, or at least a practical arrangement. She had been the one who drove Evelyn to her last 3 appointments before she passed, and I had never found a reason to distrust her in 15 years. Grief has a way of making a man hold on to familiar faces longer than he should. Julian worked long days, and Sarah, despite the divorce, had remained on reasonable terms with both of us. She brought groceries sometimes. She refilled my weekly pill organizer from the prescription bottles in the bathroom cabinet, because my fingers had been stiffening in the mornings, and the small compartments were harder to open than they used to be. I thought about all of that in the space of about 2 seconds. No, I said, just me. Dr. Owens looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. She was too professional to push and too experienced not to notice that I'd answered faster than someone who was genuinely certain. All right, she said quietly. She made a note in the chart. Then she did something I only understood the significance of. Much later, she stood, walked to the small refrigerator unit in the corner of the room used for specimen storage, and made a second note on a separate form that she clipped to the outside of a labeled sample container. I'm going to keep your blood work on file, she said, not looking up from the form. Standard protocol when we see unexplained compound levels, just in case there are questions down the road that the data can help answer. She said it the way you'd mention checking the weather before a long drive. Practical. Unremarkable. Like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. I understood that later. That evening, Sarah came to visit. She arrived at 6:30 with a container of chicken soup from the diner on Main Street and a smile that was warm enough on the surface that I almost didn't look for what was underneath it. Sarah Miller was 44 years old, auburn-haired, with the kind of careful prettiness that required maintenance, and received it. She'd been good to me in the years since the divorce, attentive, in ways that Julian rarely managed, and I had genuinely liked her for most of the time I'd known her. Thomas. She set the soup on the bedside table and pressed her hand over mine. You scared us half to death. Julian is... She hesitated. He wanted to come, but he had things to deal with. He told me to tell you he sends his love. Julian hadn't come. I noted that the way I noted most things, now quietly, without reacting, filing it away. Sarah reached into her purse and produced my weekly pill organizer, the blue plastic one from the bathroom cabinet, all 7 compartments filled. I brought your medications, she said. The nurse said they'd let you take your own as long as I brought the bottles too for verification. She smiled. I know how you hate being fussed over. She set the organizer on the tray table. I looked at it. Something Dr. Owens had said was still moving through my mind. Has anyone else had access to your medications? Sarah was watching me with an expression of complete, practiced concern. Her hand was still over mine. Her thumb moved in a small, comforting circle. I reached for the pill organizer with my free hand. Opened Tuesday's compartment. 2 white tablets, lisinopril, same as always. Or what looked like lisinopril. I put them in my mouth. I swallowed them with a sip of water. Because even then, even with Dr. Owens's question still echoing, even with the cold knot in my chest pulling tighter than it ever had, I could not make myself believe that the woman sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand, was doing what I was beginning to think she was doing. Some truths take longer to arrive than others. That night, lying in the hospital dark, I stared at the ceiling and felt the familiar heaviness begin to settle over me like a slow tide, thick and warm and wrong, moving in from the edges of my thinking. The way fog moves in from flat land, gentle and total until the lights go out one by one. The last clear thought I had before I went under was about a compass. About a boy who'd held one in both hands like it was the last true thing in the world. Mornings had become strange things. I would wake up and the room would be right. Same bedroom, same cracked plaster ceiling, same gray light coming through the east window. But something inside the room would be slightly off, like a painting hung 1 degree crooked that you can't stop noticing once you've seen it. Sounds arrived a half-second later than they should have. Thoughts formed slowly like words written in cold honey, each one taking longer to complete than the last. I told myself it was the hospital medication wearing off. I told myself it was fatigue age, the accumulated weight of bad harvest years, pressing down on a 68-year-old body that had earned its complaints. I told myself a lot of things in those April mornings, because the alternative, the thing I wasn't telling myself, was sitting in the corner of every room I walked into, and I wasn't ready to look at it directly. The morning Julian came with the papers, I had been awake since 4, but hadn't fully arrived yet. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Awake but not arrived. Present in the body, but not quite inhabiting it. I'd taken my morning medications from the organizer Sarah had refilled 2 days prior. The white tablets that looked like lisinopril, that had always been lisinopril, that I had no reason in the world to believe were anything other than lisinopril, and within 40 minutes, the familiar thickness had begun settling in around the edges of my thinking. I was sitting at the kitchen table, with a cup of coffee I'd mostly stopped drinking, when Julian came through the front door at 8:15. He was dressed better than usual, clean shirt, hair combed, and he had a leather portfolio under his arm, and a man I didn't recognize walking behind him. "Morning, Dad." Julian's voice was bright in a way that landed wrong, like a light switched on too fast in a dark room. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I said. The word came out thicker than I intended. "You look good." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, setting the portfolio on the table. The man behind him, 50s gray suit, a notary stamp kit in a black case, took a position near the wall and introduced himself in a voice I immediately lost. "This is Mr. Patterson," Julian said. "He's a licensed notary. This won't take long, Dad. I just need some signatures on a few documents before the end of the month." "What documents?" My tongue felt slightly large in my mouth. I reached for my coffee. Julian opened the portfolio and spread papers across the table with practiced efficiency, 4, 5, 6 pages, organized with colored tabs. "Insurance and property administration paperwork," he said. "It's about the ranch coverage. The policy renewal requires an updated authorization form, and there are a couple of supplemental documents for the operating account." He was talking quickly, smoothly, the words arriving in a steady stream designed to flow past rather than land. Nothing changes about the ranch itself, Dad. This is just administrative. Housekeeping. I looked at the papers. The words were there and I could see them, but they moved when I tried to focus on them, rearranging themselves, before I could catch their meaning. I pressed my finger against the first line of text and tried to hold it still. Power of attorney. I knew those words. I knew what they meant. The knowledge was in there somewhere intact and certain, but it was behind glass. I could see it, but I couldn't quite reach it. Julian, I said slowly, this says power of attorney. It's a limited authorization, he said without missing a beat. Standard for ranch operations over a certain asset value. The insurance company requires it for the new policy structure. Mr. Patterson can explain if you want, but honestly, Dad, it's boilerplate. Every ranch our size has one on file. He was looking at me with an expression of patient, helpful calm that I wanted to trust because I had spent 68 years trusting my son's face, and some habits are stronger than suspicion. Mr. Patterson stepped forward and opened his kit. Mr. Miller, he said professionally, I'll need to ask you a few standard questions before witnessing the signatures. Can you confirm your full legal name? Thomas Eugene Miller, I said. Your date of birth? March 14th, 1946. Do you understand that you're signing these documents of your own free will without coercion? I understood the words. I formed the answer the way you form an answer to a simple question without examining it too closely. Yes, I said. Julian set a pen beside my right hand. I looked at the papers again. Power of attorney. The words sat there waiting. Something in the very back of my mind, some part of me that the medication hadn't fully reached, was pulling hard at the edge of my attention, trying to get me to stop trying, to make me read the whole document before I touched that pen. But Julian was watching me with his patient expression, and Mr. Patterson was standing there with his official kit, and the kitchen was warm, and the words on the page kept sliding when I tried to hold them, and I was so tired, so genuinely and deeply tired, in a way I hadn't been able to shake for weeks. I picked up the pen. My signature came out wrong. I noticed that even then, shaky, the letters not connecting cleanly the way my handwriting usually did. I signed 3 places where Julian pointed and initialed 2 more, and when it was done, I set the pen down and felt a tremendous formless relief that the task was finished, the way you feel when something difficult is behind you, even if you can't quite remember what it was. Julian gathered the papers quickly. Too quickly. Aligned them, slid them back into the portfolio, snapped it shut. Mr. Patterson packed his kit. Thank you, Dad. Julian's hand came down on my shoulder, a brief, firm pressure. That's all I needed. He said it so quietly. That's all I needed. Not that's all the insurance company needed. Not that's all the policy requires. Just that's all I needed. As if something had been completed. As if a door had closed. I sat at the kitchen table after they left and looked at my hand. The hand that had just signed something I couldn't fully read. The hand that had worked this ranch for 50 years, that had mended fence lines and pulled calves in winter, and once caught a falling beam in the equipment shed that would have crushed a younger man. This hand trembling slightly in the April morning light, ink still faint on the index finger. Something was wrong. I knew it the way, you know, a storm is coming before the clouds arrive. Not from evidence, not from logic, but from a change in pressure that your body registers before your mind catches up. Something was wrong, and I had just signed my name to it, and I didn't know what it was, and the thickness in my thinking was pulling me down again, deep and warm and patient, and I couldn't fight it. Outside, I heard Julian's truck start. Outside, through the kitchen window, I could see May Hutchins walking up the driveway toward the front door with a basket of vegetables over one arm. She was looking toward the house, but her steps had slowed. She was looking at something at the window maybe, or at the door Julian had just come through, with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. She had her phone in her other hand. I meant to get up and let her in. I meant to ask her to stay for coffee. I meant to do a lot of things. Instead, I put my arms on the table and my head on my arms, and the warm darkness came up to meet me, and I went under. I learned what happened at the Vantage Energy office the same way I learned most things that season after the fact, in pieces from sources that weren't Julian. Ray Castillo told me some of it months later, when he'd pulled together enough to fill in the gaps. Julian's attorney filed a piece. The Midland County Records Office filed another. What I'm about to tell you is the assembled version of a morning I wasn't present for, reconstructed from documents and testimony, and one overheard phone call that May Hutchins mentioned almost as an afterthought. Julian signed the contract on a Thursday morning in late April. He drove to the Vantage Energy field office on West Illinois Avenue in his truck, not my truck, his wearing the same clean shirt he'd worn the day he brought Patterson to the house. Carter Webb had the documents prepared in advance. 3 copies bound in the same professional folders. Webb favored everything printed cleanly on Vantage Energy letterhead, with the corporate seal embossed at the bottom of each signature page. The contract read as follows, in the language Webb's legal team had drafted: Thomas Eugene Miller, acting through his duly authorized representative, Julian Ray Miller. Holder of power of attorney, dated April 9, 2014. Hereby agrees to sell and convey all right, title, and interest in the real property known as Miller Ranch, Midland County, Texas, to Vantage Energy Corporation for the sum of $4,200,000. $4,200,000 for land sitting on top of $25 million worth of oil. Webb's legal team had, of course, reviewed the POA before proceeding. This was standard practice. No competent real estate attorney closes a transaction through a power of attorney without verifying the document's validity. They checked that it was properly notarized, properly witnessed, properly executed on its face. What they did not check, what Carter Webb had specifically arranged for them not to check too carefully, was the medical history of the man who had signed that POA 9 days earlier. Webb had described Thomas Miller to his legal team as an elderly rancher in declining health who had voluntarily authorized his son to handle ranch affairs. That description was accurate enough on its surface to move through without friction. Julian signed his name on the designated line. Julian Ray Miller, attorney in fact for Thomas Eugene Miller. Webb shook his hand across the table. His grip was firm, and his smile was the real one this time, not the assembled performance he'd given me in my kitchen, but the genuine article, the one that came out when something he'd been working toward finally clicked into place. "Smart decision," Webb said. "Your father will come around." Julian looked at the check sitting on the table beside the signed contract. The commission check, separate from the sale proceeds, paid directly to Julian as a consulting arrangement that existed nowhere in the official transaction documents. $240,000. Enough to clear every debt Julian had accumulated over the previous decade, with enough left over to breathe for the first time in years. He picked it up, folded it once, put it in his shirt pocket. "He won't need to," Julian said. "He'll be taken care of." I have spent considerable time since then thinking about that phrase. He'll be taken care of. In the context of what Julian and Sarah had already arranged, a room in a care facility outside of Odessa basic coverage, the kind of place where nobody asks too many questions about how a man ended up there. Those 4 words carry a weight that I still feel in my chest when I think about them. But I didn't know any of that on that Thursday in April. I was at home. I was sitting on the back porch in the thin spring sunshine, wrapped in the old canvas jacket I'd worn since the 90s, drinking coffee that had gone cold without my noticing. The land stretched out in front of me the way it always had, the red dirt, the mesquite, the fence line running straight west, until it disappeared in the distance shimmer. 3 generations of Millers had looked at this exact view from this exact porch. My grandfather had built the original fence posts by hand, one at a time, driving them into the caliche with a post maul he'd bought in 1921. Something felt different that afternoon. Not wrong in a way I could name, just different. The way air feels different before a weather system moves through. A change in pressure. A stillness that wasn't quite peaceful. The land was trying to tell me something, same as it always had. But the medication was still thick in my bloodstream, and the signal kept breaking up before it arrived. I went inside around 3 o'clock. Sarah was in the kitchen, moving around in the quiet, efficient way she had, wiping down the countertops that didn't need wiping, straightening things that were already straight. She had a manner in those weeks that I can only describe as watchful present, in a way that felt less like companionship and more like monitoring. "Julian called," she said, not looking up from the counter. "He said to tell you he took care of some paperwork today. Administrative stuff for the ranch." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. She turned and gave me a smile that was warm and practiced and landed about a degree off true. "He didn't say specifically. You know Julian, he likes handling things himself." She turned back to the counter. "Are you hungry? I can heat something up." I looked at the back of her head. The auburn hair, the careful posture, the cloth moving in small circles on a counter that was already clean. "I'm not hungry," I said. I walked to my desk in the back room and opened the filing drawer where I kept the ranch documents. The folder labeled Property and Deed was where it always was. I opened it. The deed was there. The survey maps were there. The insurance certificates were there. But there was a gap where the operating authorization forms had been. A clean, deliberate gap, like a tooth pulled from a jaw. The surrounding documents pressed slightly together, the way papers do when something between them has been removed. My hands started to shake. Not the slow, medicated trembling of the past weeks. This was different. This was my body responding to something my mind was just beginning to understand. My fingers pressed flat against the bottom of the drawer, and I breathed very carefully in and out, the way Dr. Owens had shown me to manage the blood pressure spikes. In the kitchen, I could hear Sarah moving. The soft rhythm of her footsteps on the linoleum. The quiet domesticity of a woman making herself at home in someone else's house. I closed the filing drawer. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down at the table and accepted the cup of tea Sarah put in front of me. I wrapped both hands around it and felt the warmth move into my palms. I did not say anything about the gap in the filing drawer, because if I said something now before I understood the full shape of what had happened, before I had anything solid in my hands, what would I have? Julian would have explanations. Sarah would have her careful smile. And I would have a feeling and an empty folder and a bloodstream full of something that made the world run slow. I needed to be sharper than this. I needed one morning, just one morning, when the fog didn't come. I drank the tea. I waited. Before I tell you what Thomas did the morning the fog finally lifted, the morning everything became clear enough to fight back, drop a compass in the comments right now. Because what comes next changed everything. For everyone staying, thank you. Note this story includes fictional elements added for emotional and educational value. Names, places, and certain details are crafted, not documented. If that matters to you, this is your moment to step away. For everyone staying, thank you. The morning I finally woke up, clear, Sarah had forgotten to switch the pills. I didn't know that was what had happened, not right away. I just knew that when I opened my eyes at 4:45, and the ceiling was there above me, solid and real and completely still, the world had a sharpness to it that I hadn't felt in weeks. No lag between sound and meaning. No cotton around the edges of my thinking. Just the room and the gray pre-dawn light, and my own mind sitting up straight inside my skull for the first time in longer than I wanted to calculate. I lay there for a full minute and simply breathed. Then I got up, made coffee, and went to the filing drawer. I read every document in the property folder. Twice. The second time I used the reading glasses I'd been avoiding, because wearing them felt like admitting something, and I held each page under the desk lamp and read every word, every clause, every line of fine print that a man in a fog might have let slide past without catching. By the time the coffee was cold, I understood exactly what had been done to me. Power of attorney, full authority, not limited, signed in my name, dated April 9th. A scope of authorization broad enough to cover real property transactions. And clipped behind it, a copy of a purchase and sale agreement between Thomas Eugene Miller, through his attorney-in-fact, Julian Ray Miller, and Vantage Energy Corporation. $4,200,000. Closing date May 30th, 2014. 3 weeks away. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I had expected them to shake, expected the anger or the grief or whatever this was to come out through my hands the way strong feeling usually did. But they were steady on the papers, and my breathing was slow, and what I felt moving through me was something colder and more deliberate than panic. I set the documents on the desk. I straightened them carefully. I put my reading glasses in their case. Then I walked to the kitchen doorway and said in a voice that came out level and quiet, "Julian, Sarah, I need you both in here." Sarah was at the stove. She turned around, and I watched the color shift in her face, a small, rapid calculation happening behind her eyes that she couldn't quite conceal fast enough. Julian was at the kitchen table with his phone. He looked up, and his jaw went tight the instant he read my expression. They came into the back room. I gestured at the documents on the desk. "Tell me," I said, "what this is." Julian's eyes dropped to the papers. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Then he straightened his shoulders, the same gesture he'd made as a boy when he'd been caught at something and decided that offense was better than defense, and he said, "It's exactly what it looks like, Dad." The words hit me in the sternum like a fist. Not because they were surprising, because he didn't even try to lie. "You forged my authorization," I said. "I didn't forge anything." His voice was sharp and fast. "You signed those documents yourself. Your signature, your initials witnessed by a licensed notary." He reached into the leather portfolio on the shelf. He'd left it there 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't touched it, and pulled out his phone. He turned the screen toward me. A video. 6 seconds. Me sitting at my kitchen table, pen in hand, signing. Looking up briefly at the camera with an expression that could pass to someone who didn't know the truth of that morning for calm and deliberate intent. My stomach turned over. "The ranch is over, Dad," Julian said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word, in a way that might have been emotion or might have been performance. I could no longer tell the difference, and that realization broke something open in my chest. "We've been bleeding money for 3 years. The debt is—" He stopped, pressed his fist against his mouth. "I did what I had to do. The sale closes in 3 weeks. You'll be comfortable. Sarah and I have arranged—" "You arranged for me to be put away," I said. The room went absolutely still. Sarah made a sound, small, involuntary, a sharp intake of breath that she immediately controlled. She had been standing near the door with her arms crossed and her eyes on the floor, and she did not look up. "A care facility," Julian said carefully. "A good one. You need supervision. Dad, you've been falling your cognition." "My cognition," I said, "is perfectly clear this morning." I looked at my son, really looked at him the way I hadn't let myself look in months, because looking meant seeing, and seeing meant knowing. And what I saw made me want to sit down on the floor and put my head in my hands. Not because he looked like a stranger, Because he looked exactly like my son. The same jaw, the same eyes, the same broad shoulders, all of it exactly right and entirely wrong at the same time. Julian, this is your grandfather's land. I know what it is. His voice cracked again harder this time. Then how? My throat closed. I stopped, forced it back open. How do you look at me and do this? Julian couldn't hold my gaze. He looked away toward the window, toward the door, anywhere that wasn't my face. And in that moment, he looked exactly like the 18-year-old boy who had walked out of the equipment shed 20 years ago rather than answer a question he didn't have a good answer for. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Thomas, she said, we didn't have a choice. I looked at her. This woman who had sat beside my hospital bed and held my hand and moved her thumb in small circles and told me everything was fine while she was, I couldn't finish the thought. Not yet. Get out, I said. Julian started to speak. Dad, get out of this house. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Something in the quietness of it stopped Julian mid-breath. Both of you, right now. What happened in the next 20 minutes had a quality of unreality that I still can't fully account for. Sarah packed a bag for me, my bag, my clothes, my medications in a Ziploc bag, all of it assembled with the brisk efficiency of someone who had thought about this moment and prepared for it. Julian stood near the door with his arms at his sides and his jaw set hard and did not look at me. They walked me to the door. My door. The door my grandfather had hung on this house in 1931, solid oak, rehung twice since then, but always the same door. Julian put his hand on the door frame and said, "You'll understand eventually. I did this for the ranch." I stepped outside. The sky had opened up. A May rain, heavy, steady, the kind that comes off the flat land sideways when the wind is right, hit me across the face the moment I cleared the porch. I stood on the top step with my bag in my hand and felt the rain soak through my shirt and into my hair and run down the back of my neck. And I looked out at Miller Ranch, the fence line my grandfather had built, the equipment shed, the red dirt going dark with water. And I felt something that I do not have a clean word for. Not anger, not grief. Something beneath both of those. I was 68 years old. I had worked this land for 50 years. I had buried my wife in the county cemetery 2 miles east of here. I had given away the savings of a lifetime to give a homeless boy a future. And I was standing in the rain outside my own front door with a bag of clothes and nowhere to go. I walked down the porch steps. I walked through my gate and onto the county road. I put one foot in front of the other in the rain, the way I had told Leo Reyes to do 18 years ago on a September morning at a bus station in Midland. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. I had been walking for 40 minutes when the headlights found me. The rain had not let up. If anything, it had gotten heavier in the past quarter mile, coming in at an angle off the flatland that made an umbrella useless even if I'd had one, which I didn't. My boots were soaked through. My canvas jacket had stopped pretending to be water-resistant about 20 minutes back and was now just wet cloth pressed against wet skin. The bag in my hand, the one Sarah had packed with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been thinking about this moment, had grown heavy in a way that had nothing to do with its contents. I heard the engine slow behind me before I saw the lights. Then the white and green of a Midland County Sheriff's vehicle pulled alongside me on the county road, keeping pace at walking speed, and the passenger window came down. Thomas Miller, not a question. Ray Castillo's voice low, steady, with the particular texture of a man who had spent 30 years learning how to approach difficult situations without making them worse. I stopped walking. The rain hammered the roof of his cruiser, and ran in sheets off the hood. Castillo leaned across the seat so I could see his face clearly. He was 52 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a weathered face that had absorbed a lot of West Texas sun and showed it honestly. His eyes took in my condition, soaked to the skin bag in hand, standing on a county road in the rain at 7 in the morning, and something moved through them that was not professional assessment. Something older and more human than that. "Get in the car, Thomas," he said. "I'm fine, Ray." "You are absolutely not fine." He pushed the passenger door open from inside. "Get in the car, please." I got in the car. The warmth hit me immediately, that particular dry heat of a vehicle heater that's been running a while, and my body responded to it before my mind could maintain its composure. My jaw started shaking. Not from cold, exactly though I was cold, but from the accumulated weight of the past 2 hours, finally finding a physical outlet, now that I was somewhere that felt, however temporarily, like I didn't have to keep holding everything together by force of will. Castillo didn't say anything right away. He put the cruiser in park, reached behind the seat, and produced a wool blanket, the kind kept in patrol vehicles, for exactly these situations, and handed it across without comment. I wrapped it around my shoulders. He turned the heater up 1 notch. Then he waited. That was Ray Castillo's particular gift I'd come to understand over the years. He knew how to wait without making the waiting feel like pressure. He just sat there with his hands loose on the steering wheel, looking out at the rain-gray road ahead, giving me whatever time I needed to find the beginning of the thing I needed to say. I found it after about 2 minutes. "Julian sold the ranch," I said. Castillo turned his head and looked at me. "He had a power of attorney," I continued. "I signed it, but I wasn't—" My voice caught. I pressed through it. "I wasn't right when I signed it. There's something wrong with my medications. My doctor noticed it back in March. There's a woman, Sarah, his ex-wife, she's been handling my pills. I think she's been—" I stopped again. The sentence was hard to finish, not because I didn't know the words, but because saying them out loud made them real in a way they hadn't quite been before, even after everything this morning. "I think she's been giving me something that isn't what it's supposed to be." Castillo was very still. His jaw had gone tight. He was the kind of man whose face didn't move much when he was thinking hard, but his eyes were working fast behind the stillness. "How long?" he asked. 2 months, maybe longer." I looked down at the blanket in my lap. "I have a doctor, Dr. Owens at Midland Memorial. She kept a blood sample from March. She said something felt wrong, and she noted it in my file." I looked up at him. "Ray, the closing date on the sale is May 30th. That's 3 weeks. If I can't stop it before then—" "You're not going to stop it alone," Castillo said. His voice had changed, still calm, but with a directness underneath it, now a shift into a register I recognized as the one he used when something had moved from conversation into action. He reached for the radio, then stopped himself. Thought for a moment. Put the radio back. "There's something I need to ask you first," he said. "And I need you to think carefully before you answer." He turned to face me fully in the seat. "Is there anyone at all who could help you fight this legally? Someone with the knowledge and the standing to move fast enough to matter?" I started to say no. The word was already forming, because the honest answer was that I was 68 years old, my wife was gone, my son had just signed away my grandfather's land, and the list of people I could call in a crisis had gotten very short over the years, in the way that lists do when you get older. And then something shifted in the back of my mind. A name. An address written on a piece of notepad paper that had gone soft and yellow in a box in the equipment shed. A boy who had promised to come back. "There might be someone," I said slowly, "in Austin. But I haven't spoken to him and it's been years, Ray. A A long time. Castillo studied my face. What's his name? Leo, I said. Leo Reyes. He's a lawyer now. He has a firm, Collins and Reyes, I think, in Austin. I shook my head. I don't have a number. I don't even know if he'd... That's enough, Castillo said. He was already pulling out his personal cell phone rather than the department radio. A deliberate choice, I understood, that meant this was going to be handled carefully and outside of channels that Julian or Sarah might have access to. I can find a number. Give me 10 minutes. He stepped out of the car into the rain phone to his ear, moving a few paces away so I could have the space. I watched him through the windshield, the broad shoulders, the deliberate posture, the way he stood with his back slightly turned to shield the phone from the weather. I thought about the winter of 2001, the year Ray Castillo's wife had left him and taken the kids to her mother's place in Lubbock, and the county had cut his department budget, and he'd been working 60-hour weeks on 30-hour pay, and he'd come home to a cold house 3 nights before Christmas. I'd heard about it from May Hutchins the way I heard about most things in the county. I hadn't knocked on his door. I'd left 2 boxes on his porch, groceries enough for 2 weeks, with a gift card for the hardware store tucked underneath, and driven away before the lights came on inside. He'd never mentioned it. Neither had I. Some things don't need to be said out loud to matter. Castillo turned back toward the car after 8 minutes, not 10. He pulled the door open and got back in, bringing a gust of cold, wet air with him. He put the phone away. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before, not professional, not composed, something rawer than both of those. There's a law firm in Austin, he said carefully. Collins and Reyes. I found a main line. He paused. The R in Reyes, the managing partner. His first name is Leo. My chest did something complicated. I haven't talked to him in 18 years, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I know. Castillo held my gaze. Do you want me to make the call? I looked out at the rain coming down on the county road, at the flat land stretching away in every direction, at the red dirt going dark with water, the same red dirt my grandfather had broken with a plow 100 years ago. And my father had worked until his hands couldn't close right in the mornings, and I had given the savings of a lifetime to give away to a boy with a compass in the back of a truck. Yes, I said. Make the call. Castillo nodded once. He picked up his phone again, and this time he dialed. Castillo held the phone out to me after the 3rd ring. He picked up, he said. You should be the one to talk to him. My hand was not steady when I took the phone. I could feel the warmth of it from where Castillo had been holding it, and that small human warmth against my palm was enough to make my throat tighten all over again. I pressed it to my ear. The line was open. Someone was breathing on the other end, quiet, controlled, the breathing of a person who had learned somewhere along the way to be still under pressure. Hello, I said. My voice came out older than I expected, rougher. 3 seconds of silence. Then, and I will carry this moment for the rest of my life, a voice I had not heard in 18 years said one word. Thomas, not Mr. Miller. Not the careful professional address of a man who had grown up and moved on and filed certain parts of his past under history. Just my name. My first name. Said the way you say the name of someone you have been thinking about for a very long time. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. I pressed my fist against my mouth for a moment, the way Leo himself had once done at a bus station in September, composing himself before he could speak. Leo, I managed. It's me. I know. His voice was deeper than I remembered, richer, the voice of a man in his 30s who had learned how to use it with precision. But underneath the depth, there was something that hadn't changed at all, something that belonged to the 14-year-old boy I'd found in the back of a truck in the rain. Are you safe right now, this moment? Are you safe? The question broke something open in my chest so cleanly and completely that I had to look out the window at the rain-gray road for a moment before I could answer. 18 years. Not what happened, not how did you get this number, not even it's been so long. The first thing out of his mouth was whether I was safe. I'm with Ray Castillo, I said. Sheriff's deputy. Good man. I'm in his car. All right. I could hear him moving the sound of a chair papers shifting a door. He was standing up. He was already in motion. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out, so I told him. All of it in the flat sequential way I told things when I was trying to keep my emotions from getting ahead of my words. The geological survey, Carter Webb, the power of attorney, the medications. Dr. Owens, May Hutchins, through the window. The video Julian had shown me the care facility outside Odessa, the closing date of May 30th. I talked for nearly 12 minutes without stopping, and Leo did not interrupt me once. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Leo said, I need to tell you something, Thomas, and I need you to hear it without getting angry at me. Tell me. I've known something was wrong for 6 months. His voice was careful and direct, the way it was when he was delivering information that carried weight. I have a colleague here in Austin, David Marsh Real Estate Law, been practicing in Midland County for 15 years. Last November, he flagged an unusual pattern of transactions associated with Miller Ranch in the county property records. Liens being checked, deed searches being run, that kind of activity. He knew I had a connection to the property, and he told me about it. I absorbed that. You've been watching. I've been watching, he confirmed. I hired a research firm to pull together a financial picture, Julian's debt profile, the Vantage Energy acquisition history in the county Carter Webb's track record with similar transactions. A pause. Thomas Webb has done this before. 3 times in the past 8 years, all elderly landowners, all involving some form of capacity compromise. He's never been prosecuted because the paperwork always looks clean on its face. The rain was still coming down outside. I watched it run down the windshield in long, crooked lines. You were waiting, I said. I was building a case, he said, and there was something in his voice, not quite guilt, but an awareness of the cost of what he was saying. I needed someone on the inside who could confirm what I was seeing from the outside. I was Thomas. I was 2 weeks away from coming to you directly. I didn't want to alarm you without something solid in my hands. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry I didn't move faster. I should have moved faster. Leo. My voice came out rougher than I intended. You're moving now. That's what matters. I heard him exhale a long, controlled breath that released something he'd been holding. The closing date is May 30th, he said. That gives us 22 days. I need to move on 3 fronts simultaneously. A temporary restraining order to freeze the sale, a motion to void the POA on grounds of incapacity due to medical manipulation, and a criminal referral to the Midland County District Attorney's Office. His voice had shifted into a different register, now focused, rapid, the voice of a man who had been waiting for the starting signal and had just heard it. I'm going to need Dr. Owens to release the blood sample and testify. I'm going to need the neighbor, the one who saw Julian with the papers. May Hutchins, I said. I'm going to need whatever she has. Photographs, written account, anything. A brief pause. And I'm going to need you to be somewhere safe for the next few weeks. Not at the ranch. Somewhere Julian and Sarah don't have access to you. I can stay at the station temporarily, Castillo said from the driver's seat. He'd been listening without pretending not to, which was the honest thing to do. Or I can make some calls. Tell Deputy Castillo I'd like to speak with him directly when you're done, Leo said. I need his help coordinating with the DA's office in a way that doesn't tip anyone off prematurely. I held the phone out to Castillo. He took it, and they talked for 4 minutes in the clipped, practical way of 2 men who understood that the situation required efficiency rather than ceremony. I sat in the passenger seat of a sheriff's cruiser on a rain-soaked county road and looked at my hands in my lap. The hands that had signed something I shouldn't have signed. The hands that were still shaking, faintly, not from cold or medication now, but from something closer to relief, the particular physical release of a weight that has been carried alone for too long, finally being shared. Castillo ended the call and handed my phone back. "He's flying into Midland tomorrow morning," Castillo said. "First flight he could book." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice right then. "He said to tell you something." Castillo's expression was careful, the expression of a man relaying a message he found significant without quite being able to explain why. He said, "Tell him the compass still points north." The sound that came out of me was not a laugh, and it was not a sob. It was something between the two, something that had been sitting in my chest for 18 years, looking for a way out. And it came out now in the warm cab of a sheriff's cruiser in the rain. And Ray Castillo had the good grace to look out his window and give me a moment to collect myself. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. Breathed. Once. Twice. "All right," I said, when I could speak again. "All right." That night I slept in the break room of the Midland County Sheriff's Station, on a cot that was too short for my frame under a wool blanket that smelled like the department supply closet. The fluorescent light in the hallway stayed on all night and came under the door in a thin yellow line. It was the best sleep I'd had in 2 months. Leo Reyes walked into Midland Memorial Hospital at 8:47 in the morning, looking like a man who had not slept on the plane. I was waiting in Castillo's cruiser in the parking lot when he arrived. I recognized him immediately, even after 18 years, even from a distance. He was taller than I remembered, broader, through the chest, his dark hair cut short, and showing the first threads of silver at the temples. He moved the way men move when they have learned to be efficient with their time and their energy, no wasted motion, no hesitation at the entrance. He pushed through the hospital doors without breaking stride. But before he disappeared inside, he turned and looked toward the parking lot, found my face through the windshield, stopped completely. 18 years dissolved in the space of that look. His jaw worked hard. His hand came up, not quite a wave, something more than that, something that didn't have a name, and then he turned and went through the doors. I pressed my fist against my sternum and held it there. Castillo beside me said nothing. Good man. Inside, Dr. Patricia Owens was already at her desk when Leo arrived at her office door. She had been at her desk since 7:15, which was earlier than her shift required, which was not a coincidence. Leo introduced himself, presented his credentials, Texas State Bar Card, the power of attorney Thomas had signed at the sheriff's station the previous evening, authorizing Leo as his legal representative, a formal records request under Texas Health and Safety Code. Dr. Owens took each document in turn, examined it carefully, and set it on her desk. Then she looked up at Leo over her reading glasses. "I was wondering when someone would come," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. They were bright in a way that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction, and everything to do with the particular relief of a person who has been carrying a concern alone for a long time and has finally been given permission to put it down. "I pulled the file this morning," she continued, turning to her cabinet without being asked. "I've been maintaining the sample in cold storage since March 14th. Properly documented chain of custody log reason for retention, noted in the patient record, initialed by the lab director." She set a thick folder on the desk, then moved to the small refrigeration unit in the corner. The notation I made reads, and I quote, "Unexplained benzodiazepine concentration, inconsistent with current prescription profile. Sample retained pending investigation or clinical follow-up." That language was deliberate, Mr. Reyes. She said it plainly without ceremony, but the weight of what she had done landed in the room fully. She had written herself a paper trail in March. She had protected the evidence before anyone asked her to, because her training told her something was wrong, and her conscience would not let her ignore it. Leo took the folder. He opened it, read the notation, read it again. His throat moved once. "Dr. Owens," he said, "I need to ask you to sign a witness declaration and make yourself available to testify before a Midland County judge, potentially on short notice." She pulled a pen from her coat pocket. "I've had a declaration form prepared since April," she said. "I just needed someone to give it to." Leo stared at her. Dr. Owens allowed herself a small, composed smile. The smile of a woman who had been right about something difficult and was not going to make a production of it. She slid the form across the desk. "I'll need your firm's contact information, and I'd suggest filing the TRO application today rather than tomorrow, Mr. Reyes. The closing date is May 30th, Leo said. "I know." He took the form. "We'll file today." He was back in the parking lot in 22 minutes. I got out of the car when I saw him coming. He was carrying the folder against his chest with both arms, the way you carry something you're not going to let go of under any circumstances. When he got close enough that I could see his face clearly, I saw that his eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, I didn't think, but from the controlled effort of not crying in a professional setting for the past 22 minutes. We stood 3 feet apart in the hospital parking lot in the May morning sunshine. "She kept everything," he said. His voice was rough. "She documented everything and kept the sample and had a declaration form ready. She was waiting for someone to come ask the right question." "She's a good doctor," I said. "She's more than that." Leo pressed his lips together. Then he looked at me the way he had through the windshield, direct full without flinching, and for a moment I saw the 14-year-old boy from the back of the truck looking out through the face of a 34-year-old man. "One more stop," he said. "May Hutchins." May Hutchins opened her front door before we knocked. She must have seen Castillo's cruiser turn onto her road from the kitchen window, because by the time Leo and I reached the porch steps, she was already standing in the doorway, with her arms crossed, and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and an expression on her face that said she had been expecting this visit, and was not going to pretend otherwise. She was 71 years old, small and sharp-edged, the way certain West Texas women get when they've spent decades refusing to be worn down by heat and hardship. Her white hair was pinned back in the practical way she'd worn it for as long as I'd known her. She looked at me, at my face, my clothes, the general condition of a man who had spent the night on a cot in a sheriff's station, and her expression cracked open like a fault line. "Thomas Miller," she said, and her voice broke on my name. She came down the porch steps and put both arms around me before I could say a word, and she held on with the fierce, unapologetic grip of a woman who had known me for 30 years and was not interested in being dignified about it. "I saw them put you out. I watched from my window and I saw them, and I have been sick about it ever since." Her shoulders were shaking. I put my arms around her and held on. "I'm all right, May," I said. My voice was not entirely steady. "I'm all right." She pulled back and looked at my face with wet eyes and a jaw set hard enough to crack walnuts. "You are not all right," she said firmly. "But you're going to be." She turned to Leo, looked him up and down with the frank assessment she applied to everything. "And you must be the boy from the truck." Leo blinked. "Excuse me, Thomas talked about you," she said simply. "Not often, but when he did, it mattered." She stepped back and held the door open. "Come inside, both of you." Her kitchen smelled like coffee and something baking, and 40 years of a life lived practically and without apology. She sat us at her table covered in a yellow oilcloth printed with small roosters and put mugs in front of us without asking whether we wanted coffee, because in May Hutchins's kitchen, the answer was always yes. "The photographs," Leo said after a single sip. "I know why you're here." May was already reaching for her phone on the counter. She unlocked it, navigated with the practiced ease of a woman whose grandchildren had taught her well, and handed it to Leo. 7 photographs. April 9th morning. I was bringing over the last of my winter squash because Sarah had mentioned Thomas liked it, and I saw Julian's truck in the driveway with another car I didn't recognize. She sat down across from Leo. Julian never brought Thomas coffee. Never once in 30 years did that boy do something thoughtful for his father without wanting something in return. But there he was, being attentive. It felt wrong immediately. Leo was moving through the photographs, slowly enlarging each one with his thumb and forefinger. His face had gone very still in the way it went still when he was thinking fast. "You can see the notary's kit," he said half to himself. "And Thomas's posture." He stopped, looked up at me. His jaw was tight. "Your head is dropped to the left. Your hand is resting on the table, palm up between signatures. That's not how a man signs something he's engaged with. That's how a man signs something he can't fully track." The words landed in the kitchen like stones dropped into water. May pressed her lips together. Her hand moved to cover mine on the table, and she squeezed once hard. "That's what I saw," she said quietly. "I didn't know what I was looking at exactly, but I knew it was wrong." Leo sent the photographs to his firm in Austin from May's kitchen table. While they transmitted, he called his paralegal and spoke for 4 minutes in the rapid, precise shorthand of someone directing traffic from a distance. "Expert signature analysis rush basis. DA office contact Midland County. TRO filing today before 5. When he hung up, he looked at May directly. "Mrs. Hutchins, I'm going to need a written statement and your willingness to testify." May Hutchins picked up her coffee mug, took a long, deliberate sip, and set it back down on the yellow oilcloth with a sound like a gavel. "Young man," she said, "I have been waiting 2 weeks to testify." I laughed. For the first time in longer than I could calculate, I laughed, a real one, surprised out of me, rough around the edges from disuse. Leo looked startled for a moment, then the corner of his mouth pulled up, and that was enough. Outside, Castillo's phone rang. He stepped onto May's porch to take it. 30 seconds later, he came back through the door, and the expression on his face stopped my laughter cold. "The DA's office," he said. "They reviewed the preliminary file Leo sent last night." He looked at Leo. "They're ready. Judge Harlan signed the TRO an hour ago. The arrest warrants are being prepared now." He paused. "They want to move tomorrow morning." The kitchen went quiet around those words. Tomorrow morning. Julian and Carter Webb were planning to finalize the handover at the ranch tomorrow. They did not know what was coming. Leo set his coffee mug down slowly. He looked at me across May's yellow oilcloth table. "Then we move tomorrow," he said. We parked Castillo's cruiser on the county road a quarter-mile south of the gate and waited. It was 6:45 in the morning. The sun had just cleared the horizon line flat and orange through the May haze, throwing long shadows across the red dirt and the mesquite. The dew was still on the grass. From where we sat, I could see the front gate of Miller Ranch, my grandfather's gate, solid iron hung on cedar posts he'd cut himself, and beyond it the roofline of the house and the peak of the equipment shed and the fence line running west until it disappeared. I had not been on this property in 3 days. Leo was in the passenger seat beside me. He had not slept. I was fairly certain he'd spent the night at the motel on West Wall Street, making calls and reviewing documents. And when Castillo picked him up at 6, he'd been dressed and waiting on the curb with his briefcase and a cup of gas station coffee that he was working through with grim efficiency. He looked at the ranch through the windshield without speaking. Behind us, two black SUVs waited on the county road. One carried Leo's legal team from Austin, 3 attorneys, and a paralegal who had driven through the night. The other carried Assistant District Attorney Patricia Flores and 2 investigators from the Midland County DA's office, along with the executed arrest warrants for Julian Ray Miller and Sarah Ann Miller, signed by Judge Harlan at 9:47 the previous evening. We were waiting for Julian and Webb to arrive first. Leo had been precise about this. "We don't move until they're on the property," he'd said. "I want them comfortable. I want them to believe this morning is exactly what they planned." At 7:10, Julian's truck came up the county road from the north and turned through the gate. Carter Webb's black Suburban followed 30 seconds behind. Then a third vehicle, a Vantage Energy Company truck with 2 men in it, presumably there to begin the property assessment. I watched my son walk across my grandfather's land like it already belonged to someone else. He was moving with the loose, unhurried confidence of a man who believed the hard part was behind him. Webb walked beside him, saying something that made Julian nod. The Vantage men began unloading equipment from the truck bed. The land looked the same as it always had. That was the thing that undid me slightly, the complete indifference of it, the red dirt and the fence posts and the mesquite holding their positions, as if nothing at all had been decided here this morning. Sarah came out onto the porch. She was holding a coffee mug. She looked out at the activity in the yard with an expression I couldn't read from this distance, relief maybe, or exhaustion, or both. "All right," Leo said quietly. He picked up his phone and sent a single text message. Behind us, the doors of the 2 black SUVs opened. I got out of Castillo's cruiser. The morning air hit me cool, still carrying the smell of wet grass and red dirt, and the particular cleanness that comes right after dawn in West Texas. My boots found the gravel of the county road. I steadied myself against the door frame for just a moment, because my legs were not entirely reliable, and I was not going to let them embarrass me on this particular morning. Then I walked toward my gate. I don't know exactly when Julian saw me. I was perhaps 100 yards out when I noticed his stride change a slight break in the rhythm, barely perceptible the way a man's body registers a surprise before his mind has finished processing it. He turned and looked toward the gate. He saw me. Then he saw the people behind me. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been fear before he buried it under the hard-set jaw and squared shoulders he used when he'd decided to brazen something out. Carter Webb turned. He looked at the approaching group, the attorneys, the DA's investigators, the legal briefcases, the badges, and whatever confident calculation lived permanently behind his eyes, underwent a rapid and visible recalculation. His hand moved toward his phone. "Mr. Webb," Castillo said from behind me with the particular calm of a deputy who has said this kind of thing before, "I'd ask you to keep your hands where I can see them, please." Webb's hand stopped. Julian took 2 steps forward. His chin was up and his voice when he spoke was controlled and hard. "You don't have standing here," he said. "The property transferred legally under a valid power of attorney. Every document was properly executed and witnessed. Whatever you think you're doing, Julian." Leo's voice cut across the yard, clear and level. Julian stopped speaking. Leo walked past me through the gate and onto Miller Ranch, without hesitation, his briefcase in one hand, and 18 years of careful, deliberate purpose in every step. He stopped 12 feet from Julian and looked at him the way a man looks at something he has understood for a long time and is finally permitted to address directly. Julian stared at him. Something moved across his face that I hadn't expected to see. Not defiance, not anger, but a raw, disoriented recognition, like a man who has just been confronted by a part of his own history he thought he'd successfully buried. He knew the face. He didn't know what it meant that the face was here now, with a briefcase and 3 attorneys behind it. "Leo," I said. "Leo Reyes." Julian's jaw went tight. "The boy from the truck," he said. Not a question. "I'm Thomas Miller's legal representative," Leo said. He set his briefcase on the hood of Julian's truck, snapped it open, and began removing files with the calm efficiency of a man who has been rehearsing this moment for months. "And I have some things I'd like to show you." Behind me, Sarah had come down off the porch. She was standing in the yard now, coffee mug still in her hand, watching. When her eyes found my face across the distance between us, she went completely still. I held her gaze. I didn't look away. Leo laid 3 folders on the hood of Julian's truck and opened them in sequence with the unhurried precision of a man who has waited a long time for this moment and is not going to rush it now that it has arrived. "Folder 1, he said. He turned it to face Julian. "Blood toxicology report. Thomas Eugene Miller, dated March 14, 2014. Prepared by Dr. Patricia Owens, Midland Memorial Hospital. Elevated lorazepam concentration. A sedative not included in Mr. Miller's current prescription profile, detected at levels consistent with ongoing external administration over a period of several weeks." He looked up at Julian. "Dr. Owens retained the original sample in documented cold storage. It has been tested twice in the past 48 hours by independent laboratories. Both results are in that folder." Julian's eyes were on the documents. The confident set of his jaw had not changed yet, but his breathing had shallower now, faster, a rhythm his body had adopted without his permission. "Folder 2. Leo opened the second file. 7 photographs taken on the morning of April 9, 2014 by May Hutchins of County Road 1788. The photographs document Thomas Miller signing documents at his kitchen table in the presence of a notary public and 1 other individual." Leo placed an enlargement on top of the stack. May's clearest shot. Thomas's head dropped to the left, his hand palm up between signatures, his eyes not quite focused on the page in front of him. "An independent forensic document examiner retained by our firm reviewed both the photographs and the original signature pages. Her written opinion, also in that folder, concludes that the signatures are inconsistent with voluntary, fully conscious execution. The language she uses is precise. The signatory exhibited motor control patterns, indicative of significant cognitive impairment at the time of signing." Carter Webb took a step backward. It was a small step, almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. A man repositioning himself toward an exit. "Mr. Webb." A DA, Patricia Flores, stepped forward from behind Castillo. She was in her 40s, trim and direct, with short, dark hair and the particular quality of stillness that comes from years of standing in rooms where people were about to receive very bad news. "I'd ask you to stay where you are. We'll be discussing your involvement shortly." Webb stopped moving. The color had left his face in a way that no amount of composure could conceal. "Folder 3, Leo continued. He opened the last file and spread several pages across the hood of the truck. "Financial records. Julian Ray Miller, outstanding personal debt obligations totaling $312,000 across 4 creditors as of January 2014. Bank transfer records showing $240,000 deposited to Julian Miller's personal account on April 24, 2014, the same date the purchase and sale agreement for Miller Ranch was executed." Leo's voice had not changed in volume or pace once during this entire presentation. "Wire transfer, Origin Vantage Energy Corporation, authorized signatory, Carter Webb." Julian's mouth opened, then it closed. "The power of attorney executed on April 9th is void," Leo said. "Under Texas Estates Code Section 751, a power of attorney is invalid if the principal lacked the mental capacity to understand the nature and consequences of the document at the time of signing. The medical evidence establishes that Mr. Miller was administered a sedative compound, without his knowledge or consent, during the weeks preceding and including the date of signing. The POA is void. The purchase and sale agreement executed under that POA is void. A temporary restraining order signed by Judge Harlan at 9:47 last evening freezes all transactions related to Miller Ranch pending a full hearing. He closed all 3 folders, set his hands flat on the hood of the truck, looked at Julian directly. Additionally, he said, "I have referred this matter to the Midland County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution." Audiflores took another step forward and began speaking in the measured formal cadence of a prosecutor reading charges. "I heard the words Elder Abuse Texas Penal Code Section 22.04, a first-degree felony, fraudulent inducement, financial exploitation of an elderly person, conspiracy to commit fraud in a real estate transaction." Julian stood very still through all of it. His face had gone to stone. His hands were at his sides. Only his jaw moved, working steadily the way a man's jaw works when he is grinding his back teeth without realizing he is doing it. Then something happened that I had not prepared myself for. Sarah sat down on the ground. Not collapsed, not dramatically, not in the theatrical way of someone performing distress. She simply sat down in the dirt of the yard, right where she had been standing, like a person whose legs had made a decision that the rest of her body was only just catching up to. The coffee mug was still in her hand. She set it carefully on the ground beside her, as if that small act of order mattered. Her shoulders came forward, her head dropped, and she began to cry. Not quietly. Not the composed, controlled weeping of a woman managing her emotions in public. She cried the way people cry when the thing they have been bracing against finally arrives and turns out to be as bad as they feared, with her whole body shaking from the center outward breath, coming in jagged pulls that she couldn't smooth out, no matter how hard she tried. "I was so afraid," she said to no one in particular. Her voice was wrecked, almost unrecognizable. "I was so afraid of dying with nothing. I was so afraid of being old and poor and—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry. I'm so—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She just kept crying, sitting in the red dirt of a yard she had helped ruin with the morning light coming down around her, without mercy or comfort. I stood 15 feet away and looked at her. 40 years ago, I had stood at an altar in a Methodist church in Midland and made promises to this woman in front of everyone we knew. I had meant every word. I had believed with the complete and uncomplicated certainty of a 28-year-old man who thought he understood what life was going to ask of him, that we would face whatever came together, that we would be the kind of people who faced things together. I looked at the woman sitting in the dirt. I looked at the 37 years of mornings and suppers and hard seasons and small kindnesses and the particular intimacy of a long marriage that accumulates without your noticing, until one day you realize it is the architecture of your entire life. And I looked at what she had done. The two things existed simultaneously, and there was no way to make them fit together. And the effort of trying felt like something tearing slowly and completely in the center of my chest. And I stood there and let it tear, because there was nothing else to do. Leo appeared at my side. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was the right thing. Across the yard, Carter Webb was speaking rapidly to ADA Flores, something about cooperation and misunderstanding. His voice carrying the distinctive pitch of a man who has just understood that the situation is real and is recalculating at speed. Castillo had already moved past him toward Julian. The sky above it all was open and indifferent blue, going pale at the edges the way West Texas sky looks when it has no opinion about what happens underneath it. It just held everything the same. Castillo stopped in front of Julian. "Julian Ray Miller." His voice carried across the yard cleanly without theater. "I have a warrant for your arrest, elder financial abuse, fraudulent inducement conspiracy to commit fraud in a real estate transaction." He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. "Please put your hands behind your back." Julian looked at him for a long moment. His jaw was still set hard. His shoulders were still squared. But something behind his eyes had given way. I could see it from where I stood, the exact moment the last of his certainty collapsed inward quietly, the way a structure fails, not with a crash, but with a settling. He put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs closed with a small mechanical click. That sound hit me somewhere I hadn't prepared for. My knees wanted to buckle. I locked them and stayed standing, because I had buried my wife and worked this land for 50 years, and I was not going to buckle in my own yard. But God, it cost me. I thought about Julian at 4 years old running across the living room on Christmas morning, with toy handcuffs snapped on his wrists, and Evelyn chasing him, laughing, trying to find the key. He'd had her green eyes, and a laugh that started deep in his belly and came out enormous for a child that size. I had stood in the doorway, watching, and felt the particular fullness of a moment you know you'll carry forever. I was carrying it now, in the worst possible context, and there was nothing I could do about that except stand there and let it be what it was. Castillo guided Julian toward the patrol car. Julian walked without resistance, contained, still moving with something that might have been dignity or might have been shock. At the car door, he stopped. He turned and looked at me. I hadn't expected that. I had braced for anger, for coldness, for him not to look back at all. Instead, I saw something I had never seen on my son's face before, the look of a man understanding too late and too clearly the full human weight of what he had done. Not the legal consequences, the human weight. His mouth opened, then closed. He got in the car. I turned away before the door shut because I could not watch it close. Leo was beside me. He said nothing. He shifted slightly so his shoulder was closer to mine, a small, deliberate thing that said everything words would have cheapened. Across the yard, Castillo moved to Sarah. She was still sitting in the dirt where she had put herself down. When Castillo crouched in front of her and said her name, she looked up and said before he could finish, "I know." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady from the cold ground, and she grabbed his forearm to catch herself. She didn't look around at the yard or the people watching. She looked at her own feet, put one in front of the other, and walked. I watched her go. 40 years of mornings. 40 years of suppers and hard seasons and small kindnesses and the particular architecture of a long marriage that accumulates without your noticing. I looked at the woman walking away from me across my grandfather's land, and I felt something tear slowly and completely in the center of my chest, and I stood there and let it tear because there was nothing else to do with it. Webb was placed in ADA Flores's vehicle. The Vantage employees sat on their tailgate waiting to be told to leave. Leo's team gathered the folders from the hood of Julian's truck. Then the yard was quiet. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and felt my own heartbeat. Steady. Slower now. The heart of an old man who had been through something and come out the other side still standing. Leo touched my arm gently. "Come on," he said quietly. "There's one more thing." Leo led me to the back porch. Not the front, the back one facing east toward the fields. The one nobody used except me alone on the nights when the worry got too heavy for walls and I needed open sky above me and the smell of my own land. He knew about this porch without being told. That said something. We sat on the steps. The afternoon had come and golden and low, the light that West Texas does better than anywhere on earth spreading across the red dirt like something poured from a height. Leo reached into his jacket and brought out the compass. I knew it before it was fully out of his pocket. The brass casing, the scratched glass, the bent hinge that had never been repaired, because Leo always said the bend didn't affect the needle, and the needle was the only part that mattered. He held it out on his open palm. "I found my way home," he said. His voice was steady. The effort of keeping it steady showed in his jaw, and in the way he was holding himself very still, like a man balancing something fragile. I took the compass. The brass was warm from being against his chest. I held it in both hands and watched the needle perfectly steady, pointing north without apology, the same as it always had. "Leo," I said. "I knew." He went completely still. "Last fall," I said. "A county attorney mentioned Collins and Reyes in passing. A property records inquiry in Midland County. I looked it up that night." I turned the compass over slowly. "That was November," I said. "Before Sarah had begun managing my medications in December. Before the fog. I found your name. I found 6 months of inquiries connected to Miller Ranch." "You never called," he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "No." "Why?" I looked out at the fields. The golden light was moving through the grass in slow waves. "Because I needed to know if you'd come all the way," I said. "Not almost, not most of the way, all of it." I looked at him directly. "I told you in 1996 that a real man doesn't turn his back on the land or the people who saved him. I needed to find out whether that had gone in deep enough to hold." Leo's jaw worked hard. His eyes went bright and wet, and he didn't try to hide it. No fist against his mouth, no rapid blinking. He just sat with it open and unguarded the way a man sits with something finally true. "It held," he said. His voice broke clean on the last word, and he let it break. I put my hand on the back of his neck, the same way I had when he was a boy, and felt him go still. Then felt his shoulders drop in a long, slow release of something he had been carrying for 20 years. After a while, I held the compass back out to him. "Keep it," I said. "A compass belongs to the person who still has places to go." He took it, closed his fingers around it, pressed it against his chest. 3 weeks later, in the courtroom of Judge Harlan, the same judge who had signed the TRO that stopped the sale, I picked up a pen and signed my name. Rebecca Collins, the family law attorney who had filed the petition, told me afterward that adoption proceedings always moved her, no matter how many times she'd handled them. My hand was completely steady, the steadiest it had been since March. Leo signed beside me. Rebecca stamped both documents and looked at us over her reading glasses. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller," she said. Then she looked at Leo and said it again. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller." Leo laughed. A real one, warm, surprised, full. I laughed too. Outside, the June sun was absolute and unapologetic the way only a West Texas June can be. We walked to the truck together, drove home together, came through the gate of Miller Ranch together. I stood for a moment looking at the land, still here, and now so was my son. I've told you this story, the way it happened, as honestly as an old man can manage. Looking back, I was not a perfect father. I gave a stranger's child what I should have also given my own son: more time, more patience, more belief. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, don't wait until something breaks to show the people you love that you believe in them. I learned that lesson 68 years in standing in the rain outside my own front door. God has a way of returning what you give away in faith. Not always quickly, not always the way you expect, but it comes back. I've lived long enough to know that family stories aren't always written by blood. Sometimes it's written by a choice made in the dark, a meal offered to a hungry stranger, a hand extended to someone the world has already walked past. These are the grandpa stories worth telling. Not the easy ones. The ones that cost something. Because every family story that matters started with someone deciding that another person's future was worth more than their own comfort. And every grandpa's story collection worth passing down holds at least one moment like that, quiet, unremarkable from the outside, enormous from the inside. I'm Thomas Miller. These were my grandpa's stories and my son's. If this story reached you, leave a comment below and tell me about someone who believed in you when you had nothing. Share this with someone carrying a burden today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, these stories keep coming, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Thank you for staying until the end.